The Vorath's observation deck was silent except for the hum of its engines. The glass wall stretched from floor to ceiling, giving anyone inside a full view of the nearby star systems. Twinkling suns and drifting asteroid fields painted a picture of calm serenity, a stark contrast to the tension simmering on the deck. Mara stood alone for a moment, adjusting the strap of her armor, her eyes scanning the alien landscape outside. She was small, barely 1.5 meters tall, her frame slight compared to the towering aliens she had been sent to negotiate with. Yet her posture radiated calm confidence, the kind of quiet certainty that unsettled those who thought size equaled power. When the doors hissed open, the alien warlord Krelthar stepped in. He moved with a predatory grace, each step deliberate, echoing slightly against the polished metal floor. His forearms were decorated with insignias of conquest, scars from battles across countless systems marking his scaled skin. He looked down at Mara and sneered. "You are tiny," he said, his voice like gravel sliding over stone. "I expected a proper representative of your species, one worthy of my attention." He laughed, the sound harsh and mocking, reverberating off the walls. "This will be amusing." Krelthar was the sort of being who measured strength in muscle and firepower, dismissing cunning and strategy as weak traits. Yet in the calm of her mind, Mara felt no fear. She had come prepared for more than words. She had come prepared for everything. Behind her, the shadows shifted. A faint silhouette stretched across the far side of the deck, almost invisible against the dim light. It was enormous, larger than any creature Mara had seen, a hulking mass of muscle and armor plating that made her human form seem delicate by comparison. The beast's eyes glowed faintly, a slow, rhythmic pulse like molten metal in darkness. Mara's hand brushed the collar around its neck. "Stay," she whispered softly. The creature's massive head lowered in response, a sign of obedience but also of awareness. Krelthar noticed nothing. He continued pacing, circling Mara like a predator studying a rodent before striking. "Do you have no defenses?" he asked, his multiple eyes narrowing in suspicion. "No weapons, no fleet to protect you? Your people must be foolish indeed to send someone so small. Allies, you think you can intimidate me with threats of strategy and allies? I have crushed civilizations for less. I have made entire species bow before me. Tell me, human, what makes you think you are any different?" And with understanding. But he had never faced a human who radiated control so quietly, so confidently, yet seemed so harmless. The creature behind Mara shifted again, stepping lightly despite its size. The deck trembled faintly under its weight. Krelthar glanced over his shoulder, finally noticing the shape in the shadows. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "Is that some sort of weapon? It will turn on you the moment you are weak." A soft pulse of light ran through the creature's body, and it settled back slightly, its gaze never leaving Krelthar. "You underestimate her," a subordinate whispered to Krelthar. Krelthar waved the warning away. "She is small," he said, though a small beat of doubt formed in his mind. "No matter the size of her, pet, I am the apex predator here." Sometimes the apex predator is not the one with the biggest claws or the sharpest teeth. Sometimes it is the one who can make the impossible work. Then a sharp alarm cut through the tension. One of Krelthar's officers, eager to prove the human's weakness, stepped forward with a pulse rifle raised. "Shall we teach her a lesson, my lord?" he said. Krelthar's claws twitched, but before he could respond, Varric moved. In the blink of an eye, the massive creature was between the officer and Mara, its hulking form stretching across the deck. The walls of the observation deck shuddered under its weight. Krelthar took a step back, watching in disbelief as Varric's claws made contact with the deck, sending sparks flying. The officer barely had time to react before he was thrown across the room, landing with a sickening crash against the reinforced glass. The others froze. Even Krelthar's war-hardened instincts screamed at him to retreat. Mara stepped forward, raising a hand. "Varric, calm," she commanded, her voice soft but firm. The beast lowered its head slightly, its massive form still tense but obedient. "He thought we were weak. Show him our strength without destroying the entire ship." Varric's presence was overwhelming, yet controlled. Mara's control over the beast was not just physical. It was a bond, a connection that transcended species. She did not command through fear, but through respect and understanding. Krelthar's laughter had disappeared. His mind raced. He had seen war, carnage, and brutality, yet nothing prepared him for this. A small human, fragile in appearance, commanding a creature that could easily level a city. He had underestimated them, and for the first time in his life, doubt gnawed at his confidence. Mara's eyes met his, calm and unyielding. "I am not here to fight," she said. "I am here to show that humans are not to be underestimated. Size does not define strength. Intelligence, strategy, and bonds do. Varric is proof of that." The observation deck was quiet again, the tension thick enough to choke on. Myra adjusted her stance slightly, her armor glinting in the artificial lights. "I am small," she said softly, "but I am not alone, and I never have been." He had never felt this type of fear, not the fear of death, but the fear of being outmatched in ways he could not immediately comprehend. For the first time, he realized something fundamental. Size, strength, and weaponry were not the only measures of power. A human could be small, but if they had the right mind, the right companion, and the right strategy, they could be a force beyond reckoning. Mara didn't push further. She simply waited calm and steady, letting Krelthar's mind wrestle with the truth. Varric stood behind her, massive and alert, a silent warning of the consequences of misjudging the human. Krelthar finally straightened, his claws flexing. "This changes nothing," he said, though his voice lacked the previous confidence. Mara knew he was already recalculating his assumptions, and that was the first victory. Mara gave a small, polite nod. Sometimes, the first step in winning is making the other side think carefully before they strike. And deep down, he knew that underestimating her could be his first, and last, mistake. The deck of the Vorath still trembled from Varric's display, yet Mara remained calm, her small frame almost serene against the chaos of tension. Krelthar's eyes, once full of arrogance, now darted between her and the massive creature behind her. He could not shake the feeling that he had stepped into something far larger than a simple negotiation. The alien warlord's forearms flexed as he struggled to compose himself. "You have a weapon," he said, trying to regain his authority, "but it is not enough to sway me. I have conquered species far larger and stronger than your pet." "You are correct," she said softly. "Varric alone cannot protect me if I make mistakes, but I am not without my own defenses, and you may find that size does not always dictate the outcome of a fight." A smaller species might attempt negotiation, but this human radiated a confidence that bordered on madness. Before Krelthar could respond further, an alarm blared across the ship. Red lights flashed violently as the security system detected an intruder. Mara's small eyes flicked toward the side console, where readings confirmed her suspicion. Krelthar's officers were attempting to bypass her security protocols. "Varric," she whispered. The massive creature shifted, its glowing eyes locking onto the movement of the approaching aliens. Its tail slammed against the floor, sending a wave of vibration through the deck, and Mara's voice rang clear, controlling yet gentle. "Stop them." The deck shook as Krelthar's forces realized that they were no longer in control. Krelthar's laughter, once full of confidence, turned into a harsh bark of frustration. "Cease this nonsense. It is only a pet. It cannot match my forces." But as the sound of metal tearing and cries of officers filled the room, his words sounded hollow. Varric moved not with rage, but with discipline, protecting Mara and neutralizing threats efficiently, almost methodically. Mara remained calm amid the chaos, moving across the deck to a control panel. Her fingers flew over the touch interface, rerouting power, sealing doors, and activating defensive measures. She was small, yes, but every action she took was precise, every command measured. Even Krelthar could not deny the effectiveness of her coordination. One officer attempted to sneak up behind Mara, hoping to incapacitate her before Varric could intervene. The creature's massive head turned almost instantly. A low, rumbling growl vibrated across the deck, and the officer froze, paralyzed by the raw presence of the apex predator. Mara didn't even have to move. "Do not come any closer," she warned softly. Varric's eyes glowed brighter, and the officer fell back in terror, realizing that the human had tamed something far beyond ordinary comprehension. Krelthar's mind raced. He had faced creatures larger than any human, beasts designed for war and destruction. Yet here, a single human, barely taller than some of his soldiers, commanded such a force. And not through fear, but through understanding, strategy, and a bond that defied his expectations. "Enough of this," Krelthar growled, finally stepping forward. His massive form loomed over Mara, and he raised one of his energy weapons, calibrated to obliterate the deck. But before he could fire, Mara moved. She pressed a small device on her wrist, sending a pulse through the floor. Varric's tail lashed out, smashing into the console, controlling the weapon's charge. Sparks flew and the weapon malfunctioned, forcing Krelthar to step back. A flicker of shock crossed his face. "Impossible," he muttered. Humans were clever, yes, but to anticipate my actions so precisely, it was unheard of. Mara's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "We are not easy to predict," she said. "You measure strength in firepower. We measure it in preparation, precision, and bonds. And we adapt faster than you can imagine." The warlord's army began regrouping, attempting to corner her. They were fast, strong, and well-trained, but they lacked the coordination between intellect and sheer power that Mara had mastered. Krelthar's second-in-command, a hulking alien with armored plates like Mara's own pet, charged forward with a battle cry. Varric's eyes locked on him instantly. The clash was brief but devastating. Varric's massive claws swept the floor, knocking the alien off balance before lifting him effortlessly into the air. Mara did not intervene. She simply observed, guiding her companion's actions with precise gestures. The room echoed with the sounds of metal crashing and armor shattering, but at no point did Mara show fear. Other officers tried to flank her, but Varric anticipated their movements, cutting them off with a speed that contradicted its enormous size. Mara used the chaos to her advantage, sealing escape routes and isolating the intruders. Krelthar, watching the battle unfold, realized that brute force alone would not win this fight. The human had created a synergy between herself and a creature far larger than any of his soldiers, a bond that made them more than the sum of their parts. "You rely on that beast too much," Krelthar shouted, frustration evident in his tone. "Without it, you are nothing." "Varric is a part of our strength, yes, but even without him, we adapt. And adaptation is why humans survive where others fall." Krelthar swung again and again, but Varric's massive form shielded Mara, countering every move with lethal precision. In the midst of the chaos, Mara accessed the ship's main control panel. With her commands, automated turrets activated, targeting Krelthar's reinforcements with pinpoint accuracy. The humans accompanying Mara were in awe. The small, unassuming human had turned the tide of what should have been an overwhelming ambush. Krelthar roared again, frustration boiling into rage. He had faced armies larger than this, but none had moved with such coordination. None had combined intellect and raw power so seamlessly. Every strike he ordered was countered before it could land. Every tactic he employed was anticipated. And through it all, Mara remained calm, guiding the apex predator at her side as if she were conducting a symphony. The observation deck was now a battlefield. Sparks flew, metal groaned, and the screams of defeated officers echoed. Yet Mara moved with grace, small but precise, her control over Varric absolute. One final officer tried to attack from behind, hoping Mara would not notice. But the beast's eyes glowed, its tail swinging with force, knocking him into a wall. Mara's hand reached for her communicator, sending a silent signal to the rest of her allies. Reinforcements would arrive soon, but until then she and Varric held the line. Krelthar, breathing heavily, realized something important. His arrogance, his assumption that humans were weak, had been his first mistake. Mara was not just small. She was intelligent, calm under pressure, and capable of commanding forces beyond comprehension. Her bond with Varric amplified her abilities, turning a simple human into a strategist capable of controlling the battlefield. The warlord took a step back, reassessing his approach. "Perhaps," he muttered, almost to himself, "perhaps I underestimated this species." The realization sank deep. Size and firepower alone did not define a predator. Adaptability, strategy, and bonds, things humans mastered, could turn the smallest being into the apex of a battlefield. Varric shifted slightly behind Mara, a silent sentinel, ready for any movement. The officers who remained hesitated, unsure whether to continue the attack or retreat. Mara's calm presence and the beast's overwhelming power created a standoff that even Krelthar could not immediately break. In that moment, Mara smiled faintly. This was only the beginning. The warlord had underestimated humans, and underestimation was a dangerous mistake. She would make sure he learned it the hard way. The corridor was filled with the echoes of groaning metal and distant alarms. Sparks danced across broken panels, casting flickering light over the battered officers who had dared to challenge Mara. Yet she moved as though she were in a quiet room, her steps measured and calm. Varric's massive form followed, each step reverberating like a drumbeat, a constant reminder to any who might underestimate them. Krelthar, watching from a secure platform above, felt his frustration growing. He had expected the small human to falter under pressure, to panic when faced with overwhelming odds. Instead, Mara was orchestrating a defense as if she had rehearsed it 1,000 times. Every command she gave, every gesture she made, was executed perfectly by her companion. It was as though the two shared one mind, one will. "You cannot sustain this," Krelthar hissed, his voice echoing through the observation deck. "Even if you can control that beast, the rest of your people are weak. They will fall before me." "It's the way we think. Adapt, observe, predict, act. That is strength." Her fingers danced across the console, rerouting power to locked doors and automated defense systems. Small drones emerged from hidden compartments, targeting isolated enemies with non-lethal energy blasts that stunned rather than killed. Even her allies were amazed at her coordination. One officer, braver, or perhaps more foolish than the others, attempted a direct assault on Mara. He lunged, energy blade raised, aiming for her shoulder. Varric's massive head shifted with lightning speed, blocking the path and snapping the weapon aside with ease. The sheer force sent the officer sprawling into a wall, unconscious. Mara didn't flinch. She simply stepped over the fallen officer and continued toward the central control panel, guiding Varric with subtle gestures. Krelthar's mind raced. He had underestimated humans, yes, but now he saw something far more dangerous: their ability to adapt and coordinate. His warships and elite soldiers could not match this level of precision, especially when the human commanded a force far larger than herself. Mara paused at the central control panel, eyes scanning the readouts. She activated a series of communications relays, sending signals to nearby human patrols. Reinforcements were on their way, but the real advantage lay in the tactics she had already established. Each door sealed, each turret activated, each drone deployed. Everything worked together seamlessly, forming a deadly web of control that even Krelthar's best officers could not unravel. "You rely on machines and tricks," Krelthar growled. "Without them, you are nothing." Mara's eyes followed the movement of the remaining intruders. She calculated their positions, their potential paths, their weaknesses. Even though she was small, she commanded the battlefield with absolute authority. One of Krelthar's lieutenants, a massive alien with armor plates thicker than Mara's height, charged at her with blinding speed. The human barely moved, and yet Varric intercepted with a swipe of his massive claw. The lieutenant's armored body was thrown against a wall, sparks flying, metal groaning under the impact. Mara stepped aside calmly, never raising her weapon. Her control over the situation was complete. Krelthar roared from above, fury mixed with disbelief. How can one human, one creature, hold this much power? He had faced titans, monsters bred for war, armies trained to perfection. Yet here a small human with a pet was dismantling his forces with terrifying efficiency. Mara, noticing the moment of hesitation in the enemy ranks, pressed forward. She moved toward the control console, her small frame almost invisible compared to the massive warlord and his forces. "We are not limited by size," she said, her voice steady, her fingers working the controls with precision. "We are limited only by our imagination." They activated energy barriers, used their environment strategically, and coordinated attacks with drones and small automated systems. Krelthar's soldiers found themselves trapped in a labyrinth of tactics they could not anticipate, each move countered, each advance thwarted. Varric, sensing the enemy's disarray, unleashed a controlled display of strength. Its massive limbs tore through corridors, not indiscriminately, but with calculated precision. Officers who had thought themselves safe were thrown off balance, incapacitated without the need for lethal force. Mara's bond with Varric allowed her to extend her influence across the battlefield. She did not need to confront every threat physically because her companion did so with her guidance. Krelthar, watching from above, clenched his fists. His pride was battered, his arrogance shaken. Every assumption he had made about humans, about their weakness and fragility, was crumbling before his eyes. This small species, which he had once dismissed, was demonstrating the apex of coordination and adaptability. "You may have controlled one or two beasts before," he snarled, "but never like this. Never a creature this intelligent, this loyal, this overwhelming. Something you have yet to grasp." But humans thrived in unpredictability, in creativity, in bonds that could turn the smallest being into the deadliest force. Varric, sensing the shift in Krelthar's strategy, moved closer to Mara, standing as a sentinel between the human and any potential attack. Its massive form radiated power, and yet it remained calm, obedient, a living extension of Mara's will. One of Krelthar's more cunning officers tried to use the environment against them, activating a series of trap doors and energy nets. Mara's fingers flew across the console, redirecting energy and opening escape routes for her allies while trapping the intruders. Varric adjusted seamlessly, blocking escape routes and neutralizing threats with precision. Mara did not need to raise her voice or her weapon. Her presence and strategy were enough. Krelthar growled, realizing that this was not a battle of strength, but of minds. Mara had created an ecosystem of tactics, where every movement, every action was anticipated and countered. She had taken the raw power of her companion and integrated it with intelligence, technology, and timing, creating a force that dwarfed Krelthar's expectations. Adaptation, Mara said softly, almost to herself. It is the key to survival, and humans, we excel at it. Every strategy they employed was countered before it could take effect. Mara's calm presence was like a beacon, guiding her companion and her allies with precision. The human reinforcements arrived just as Mara had predicted. Small shuttles, equipped with modular drones and energy support units, linked up seamlessly with her defenses. Within moments, the tide of battle had shifted completely. Krelthar's forces, once confident, were now disoriented, struggling to understand how a species so small and seemingly fragile had turned the tables with such effectiveness. Mara watched it all unfold, her calm gaze unwavering. Varric stood behind her, massive and imposing, a living testament to the power of understanding and control. Together, they had transformed what should have been a desperate situation into a demonstration of human ingenuity and adaptability. Krelthar, observing from above, felt the first seeds of true fear. He had underestimated humans, and in doing so, he had allowed a single human and her companion to dismantle his forces with astonishing efficiency. For the first time, he realized that size, power, and intimidation were not enough to guarantee victory. Mara's small form moved with purpose, her eyes scanning for any remaining threats. She did not panic, she did not hesitate. Every action was calculated, every decision precise. And behind her, Varric's massive form moved in perfect harmony, neutralizing threats and maintaining control over the battlefield. "You may be strong," Mara said, her voice carrying across the deck. "But strength without intelligence, without strategy, without understanding is meaningless. Humans may be small, but we have mastered the art of turning weakness into strength and unpredictability into power." Yet here he was, confronted by a species that used their minds, their bonds, and their creativity to become something far greater than appearances suggested. For the first time in his life, Krelthar realized that he had underestimated the humans, and underestimation, he knew instinctively, could be deadly. Mara, sensing the shift in his demeanor, smiled faintly. She had turned the battlefield into a demonstration not just of Varric's power, but of human ingenuity. The small human who had once seemed fragile had become the orchestrator of a force that even a warlord like Krelthar could not ignore. The deck was quiet again, but the silence was different this time. It was a silence of anticipation, of recognition. Krelthar understood that the human before him was no ordinary opponent. And for Mara, the battle was only just beginning. The void outside the Vorath shimmered with distant stars, but the battlefield inside the ship had become a chaos of motion, strategy, and raw power. Mara moved with a calm precision, small hands flying across control panels, rerouting energy to locked doors and activating auxiliary defenses. Varric followed her like a shadow, enormous and silent, every step calculated to intercept and neutralize threats before they could reach her. Krelthar's voice boomed through the ship's communication system. "You will pay for this insolence, human. Your tricks cannot hold against the might of the Vorath." His warlord instincts screamed at him to strike, but every approach Mara took seemed anticipated, every counter he devised met with precise action. And all the while, the massive apex predator, Varric, moved as if reading his mind. Every officer he sent to intercept Mara was neutralized swiftly, efficiently, almost effortlessly. One of his elite lieutenants, a towering alien with multi-layered armor and cybernetic implants, attempted to flank Mara from the side corridor. He moved fast, calculating that he could strike before she noticed. Yet Varric anticipated him. Its massive claws slammed into the floor, sending vibrations through the metal corridor that forced the lieutenant to stumble. A single swipe of the beast's tail threw him into the wall with bone-crushing force. Mara didn't even glance back, guiding her companion with a small gesture of her hand. Krelthar's eyes narrowed. How can one human control such power? How can she anticipate every move before it happens? He clenched his four hands into fists, realizing the full weight of his mistake. He had measured humans by their size, their apparent fragility, but this small figure had turned the battlefield into her domain. She had fused intellect and strategy with brute force in a way he had never seen before. Mara activated a new set of automated drones from hidden compartments in the walls. They swooped into the corridors, targeting isolated officers and forcing them into tight spaces where Varric could intercept. The alien soldiers, once confident, now hesitated, unsure of where to step or how to strike. Mara had created a deadly network of traps, channels, and controlled chaos, all executed without a single misstep. Krelthar's frustration reached its peak. "Enough!" he bellowed. "I will crush her myself." He launched from his observation balcony, descending in a controlled drop, energy blade in hand. The ship's gravity system pulsed around him as he landed in the central corridor, shaking the floor with the impact. Mara turned slightly, her calm eyes meeting his. "You still think this is a battle of strength," she said. "It is not. It is a battle of wits, planning, and adaptability. You cannot outmuscle what you cannot predict." At the same time, Varric moved like lightning, placing itself between Mara and Krelthar with precision, swiping its massive claw to send the warlord staggering back. The corridor shook under Varric's weight, sparks flying as metal bent and cracked under its immense power. Krelthar's eyes widened in disbelief. He had faced creatures designed to crush planets, yet this combination of human intellect and controlled power was something entirely new. His arrogance faltered, replaced by a growing fear that he could not simply overpower this species. Mara pressed forward toward the central console, her mind racing through every tactical option. She opened doors to create bottlenecks, rerouted energy to power turrets and defense drones, and manipulated the ship's internal environment to control Krelthar's forces. Even in his rage, the warlord could not counter her precise and adaptable strategy. Varric roared softly, signaling its readiness. Mara raised her hands slightly, and the beast moved forward, cutting through a group of approaching soldiers with a controlled sweep of its massive limbs. Each move was deliberate, calculated, and efficient, never wasted, never reckless. Mara's coordination with Varric turned the battlefield into a controlled environment, a trap designed not to slaughter but to neutralize, to demonstrate the futility of underestimating them. Krelthar's remaining officers attempted to regroup, but Mara had anticipated every movement. She directed drones, locked doors, and guided Varric to block escape routes. Every human on the deck followed her lead, moving with confidence because they trusted her judgment. They were small, yes, but the synchronization between humans and technology made them an unstoppable force. "You rely too much on that beast," Krelthar shouted, his voice echoing through the corridors. "Without it, you are weak." "Even without him," she said calmly, "we adapt. Humans survive because we turn weakness into strength, unpredictability into power, and your arrogance is our advantage." He had underestimated humans not just in size but in mind, in adaptability, and in their ability to use every resource at their disposal. Varric moved again, its massive form slicing through corridors to intercept isolated officers attempting to regroup. Mara guided the beast with subtle gestures, her mind calculating trajectories, timing, and positioning. Krelthar's soldiers were overwhelmed, unable to keep pace with the precision and intelligence of the human and her companion. Mara reached the final control panel, her small hands moving over the interface to initiate a full lockdown of the deck. Energy barriers sprang up, isolating Krelthar's forces and cutting off their escape routes. Drones deployed to cover every angle, forcing the warlord's officers into a confined space where they could be neutralized efficiently. Krelthar, now standing at the center of the deck, realized the full extent of his mistake. He had faced armies, titans, monsters, and yet none had challenged him like this small human with a massive companion. The battlefield was no longer a place of brute strength, but of strategy, intelligence, and perfect coordination. "You may be strong," Mara said, her voice calm, "but strength without intelligence is meaningless. Humans may appear small, fragile, and weak, but we have mastered the art of using our minds, our bonds, and our creativity to become the apex of any battlefield." The combination of human intellect, strategy, and her companion's raw power had created a force that even the warlord could not ignore. Krelthar took a step back, reevaluating. Every instinct he had relied on, every assumption he had made about humans was crumbling. He realized that underestimating them was a fatal mistake. Mara had turned a near-impossible situation into a demonstration of human supremacy, not through size, but through wit, coordination, and controlled power. The remaining officers hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Varric's massive eyes locked onto each movement, neutralizing threats before they could act. Mara's calm presence guided the humans, their confidence growing with every precise command she gave. The battlefield was hers, not through size or firepower, but through strategy, understanding, and adaptability. Krelthar, for the first time, felt true fear. He had underestimated humans, and in doing so allowed one small human and her companion to dismantle his forces completely. Mara had proven that humans were not to be measured by size or strength alone, but by intelligence, coordination, and the ability to turn adversity into victory. Mara raised her hand slightly, signaling Varric to advance toward the final remaining officers. The massive creature moved with precision, blocking escape routes and neutralizing threats efficiently. Mara's fingers danced across the console, maintaining control over drones, energy barriers, and environmental systems. Krelthar's forces were trapped, overwhelmed, and outmaneuvered at every turn. "You may have power," Mara said, her voice calm and unwavering, "but it is meaningless without understanding. Humans may be small, but we have learned to use every advantage, to adapt faster than anyone can predict, and to turn the smallest strength into the greatest force. You underestimated us, and that was your greatest mistake." Mara, small and seemingly fragile, had become the orchestrator of a force greater than he had ever imagined. The deck was silent once more, but this silence was different. It was a silence of recognition, of acknowledgement. Krelthar understood, finally, that humans were not to be underestimated. Mara had transformed a near-impossible defense into a total victory, demonstrating the apex nature of human ingenuity and coordination. For Mara, the battle was not yet over, but the lesson had been delivered. The galaxy would remember that humans may be small, but with intelligence, strategy, and bonds, especially with companions like Varric, they were capable of turning the tide against the mightiest of foes. The corridors of the Vorath were silent except for the hum of the ship's systems and the soft, deliberate footsteps of Mara. Dust and debris from the battle clung to the walls, evidence of the chaos that had raged hours earlier. The once confident alien warlord Krelthar had retreated to a small command platform, his pride shattered, his forces scattered and demoralized. Yet Mara did not pause. She moved with purpose, every step measured, every breath calm. Behind her, Varric's massive form trailed like a shadow, its glowing eyes scanning for threats even now. Krelthar's voice boomed through the ship's communication system. "You have survived this time, human, but know this, you cannot defeat the Vorath. Its power is absolute." "Power," she said, her voice steady, "is meaningless without intelligence, without adaptability, without understanding. You measured strength in size, in firepower, and in intimidation. You failed to consider strategy, coordination, and bonds, and that is why you lost." Krelthar's officers, scattered throughout the ship, peered nervously from behind damaged consoles, unsure whether to continue fighting or retreat. The apex predator behind the human was a constant reminder. Attack, and they would face total annihilation. Krelthar clenched his four hands into fists. He had underestimated humanity at every step, and now he understood that mistake could cost him far more than pride. The battle had become not just a contest of strength, but a lesson in the power of human ingenuity. Mara had turned what should have been a desperate situation into a calculated victory, using every resource at her disposal: her companions, technology, and mind. She approached the central command console, her fingers flying across the controls. The ship's systems hummed in response to her commands, energy redirected, security doors locked, and tactical defenses activated. Mara did not need weapons herself. Her control over Varric and the ship's systems made her a force beyond measure. Krelthar, realizing he could no longer rely on brute force, attempted a more subtle approach. "You may have won this battle," he said, his voice tinged with frustration, "but the galaxy is vast. You cannot control it all." The galaxy may be vast, but even in its vastness, strategy, intellect, and bonds can turn the smallest into the strongest. The warlord's confidence faltered as he realized that he was trapped, not by walls or weapons, but by the combination of human mind and apex predator. Mara's fingers danced across the console once more, activating communications with nearby human fleets. Within minutes, reinforcements would arrive, not because she needed them to win, but because she wanted to ensure that Krelthar's lesson would be witnessed by all. Humans, no matter their size, commanded power far beyond appearances. The warlord's voice trembled slightly as he spoke again. "You are clever, human. I cannot deny that. But cleverness alone cannot defeat the Vorath. And now you understand why humans endure where others fail." The warlord's confidence, built over countless conquests, was crumbling. Mara turned slightly, her eyes scanning the control panels. She activated a system that sealed off the remaining corridors, ensuring that Krelthar's forces could not regroup. Her allies moved in synchronization with her commands, reinforcing her strategy and demonstrating the unmatched coordination of humans. "You may retreat," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But know this, humans are not to be underestimated, and anyone who doubts us will learn the same lesson you are learning now." The small human before him, fragile in appearance, had orchestrated the defeat of his forces with precision and efficiency that rivaled even the most powerful alien warlords. Varric let out a low, rumbling growl, a warning that reinforced Mara's words. The warlord realized that resistance was futile. Even if he had the strength to fight, he lacked the understanding and coordination to overcome the combined human strategy and the apex predator at her side. Mara approached the final control panel, her small hands moving with purpose. She initiated a sequence that locked down the entire deck, ensuring that Krelthar's escape was impossible without her approval. The warlord's confidence faltered completely as he realized the extent of her control. "You may have won this time," Krelthar hissed, his voice trembling, "but the galaxy is vast. You cannot control everything. We only need to show that humans are adaptable, intelligent, and capable of turning the smallest strength into the greatest force. You underestimated us. That was your mistake. And now you understand the consequences of underestimation." The warlord's remaining officers hesitated, unsure whether to continue fighting or surrender. The combination of Mara's calm authority, Varric's overwhelming strength, and the human strategy implemented throughout the ship created a force that even Krelthar could not challenge. Mara raised her hand slightly, signaling Varric to step forward. The beast's massive form moved with controlled precision, blocking any possible escape routes. Krelthar realized he was completely surrounded, not by walls, but by the intelligence, adaptability, and power of the humans he had once dismissed. "You may have strength," Mara said softly, "but without understanding, coordination, and adaptability, strength alone is meaningless. Humans may be small, fragile, and underestimated, but we have mastered the art of turning adversity into victory. You underestimated us, and now you know the price of that mistake." She, small and seemingly fragile, had orchestrated a victory that demonstrated the apex nature of human ingenuity, coordination, and adaptability. Varric's massive form shifted slightly, a silent sentinel, ensuring that the lesson was understood. Mara's calm presence radiated authority, a testament to the power of intelligence over brute force. Krelthar, for the first time in his life, understood that humans were not to be measured by size or apparent fragility. Their strength lay in their minds, their strategy, and the bonds they formed with forces far greater than themselves. Mara took a final step toward the warlord, her gaze unwavering. "This is not about conquest," she said. "It is about survival, adaptability, and the understanding that underestimating humans is a fatal mistake. Your arrogance blinded you. We survive because we adapt. And in the galaxy, survival is the true measure of power." He had learned the lesson that humans had been demonstrating for centuries. Size and strength could be deceiving, but intelligence, strategy, and bonds could turn even the smallest being into an unstoppable force. The ship was silent except for the soft hum of its systems. Mara and Varric stood together, small and massive, fragile and unstoppable, a living testament to human ingenuity and power. Krelthar's forces, scattered and defeated, had no choice but to acknowledge the lesson. "You have shown me the true strength of humans," Krelthar said finally, his voice low and filled with reluctant respect. "I underestimated you. That was my mistake." Never assume that size or brute force defines strength. Humans survive and thrive because we adapt, we strategize, and we form bonds that make us stronger than we appear. Mara had not only survived, but had demonstrated the apex nature of human intelligence, strategy, and coordination. The galaxy would remember this day. Humans, small in stature but vast in ingenuity, had shown that size was no measure of power. They had turned a near-impossible situation into a total victory, using their minds, their bonds, and their controlled strength to overcome the mightiest of foes. Mara and Varric stood together on the deck, calm and resolute. The humans who had fought alongside them moved with newfound confidence, inspired by the victory and the demonstration of what humanity could achieve when intellect, strategy, and bonds were combined. Krelthar's retreating fleet would carry the lesson across the stars. Humans may be underestimated, but they are forces to be reckoned with. And the small human and her massive companion who orchestrated this victory would become legends, the embodiment of the idea that intelligence, strategy, and bonds define the true apex predators of the galaxy. Mara looked out at the stars, her eyes calm but determined. The battle was over, but the war for respect, for recognition, and for survival in the galaxy was ongoing. Yet she knew one thing with certainty: humans would endure, they would adapt, and they would continue to prove that strength is not measured in size alone, but in the mind, the heart, and the bonds that connect them to forces far greater than themselves. Varric shifted slightly, its massive body leaning closer to Mara, a silent acknowledgement of partnership and loyalty. Together, they had turned the tide against an overwhelming enemy. Together, they had proven that humanity, no matter how small, could command the power of the galaxy when intelligence, strategy, and bonds were applied. The galaxy would remember the day a small human and her apex companion had faced a mighty warlord and emerged victorious. The lesson was clear: never underestimate humanity. And never mistake the size of a being for its strength, especially when that being commands forces far beyond imagination. Mara turned away from the observation window, small but unbroken, with Varric following closely behind. The galaxy was vast, but humans had proven their place within it. Adaptable, intelligent, and bonded with forces beyond comprehension, they were true apex predators, not by size but by the cunning, creativity, and relentless spirit that defined them. The battle was won. The lesson had been delivered, and the legend of the human and her pet, the apex beast, would echo across the stars for generations to come.